Hey yo, it's Gluke. Welcome back. Today we're going even deeper with chords. Let's go! So here we are back in Ableton. I've already done a video on chords and that really covered just the super basics of how they work and how to make them. The point of this video is to build off of that first video. In this one, we'll figure out how to better choose chords for the progression that we're looking for, and we'll also learn some tricks on how to beef up our chords and make them a lot more emotional. Before we get started, just to recap the first video really quickly. The basis of a chord is any two notes that are playing at the same time, but usually we're talking about triads. And so what that means is that there's three notes. And so we'll have the root note, we'll have the third, and then we'll have the fifth. And each of these are one note apart from each other in the scale. It's a little bit easier to see on an actual piano. Another way you can remember is that our root is the name of the chord. Our third is going to be either 3 or 4 half steps above. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be a major. 3 would be a minor. And our fifth is 7 steps above the root. That's not really going to change. Now, in order to make our chord progression, we'll just need to make sure that we're playing chords that are all within the key signature, but using a different root note also within the key signature. If I wanted this chord progression to go up, what I would do is duplicate this. I would put the root note on the next scale degree above C. And in this case, we'll be writing in C major, just so that it's easier to follow with all of the white keys. And then make sure that all of our notes are on white keys and that they're one note apart from each other. So in this case, we'll have a D minor chord, then we'll have an E minor, and an F major. And so this is what this chord progression sounds like. So by definition, this is a chord progression, and we have accomplished the task of writing a chord progression. So very good, yay! That's the short and sweet on how to make a chord progression. This isn't the most interesting one that I've ever made, but I'm going to show you some tricks as to how we can choose more emotive chords. So go ahead and get rid of that for now. Now, something that I didn't really talk about in the last video is that if we make chords on every note, we'll get a mixture of majors and minors. However, there's one note in both scales that's going to be a little bit different. So here I've built chords on every single note in C major. So here are all of the root notes. These would be all of the thirds, and then these would be all of the fifths. And if we listen to this, we'll start to be able to hear the difference between a major and a minor chord. Because really the only thing that's different about them is the third, whether it's 4 half steps or 3 half steps. So here I've colored the chords, and so pink are major chords and blue are minor chords. And you're probably wondering, what's this green chord here? Well, this green chord is what's called a diminished chord. What makes a diminished chord unique is that we have a minor third here. That's not very unique, but the fifth is actually 6 half steps and not 7 away from the root. This is the only chord in the key signature that does this. So normally when we're writing chord progressions and we want it to be really rich and harmonic, we don't want to use this chord. But this is only in this position in a major key. In a minor key signature, this is actually the second scale degree. So if I rearrange the chords that we just wrote for C major, there's something called a relative minor, and that's going to be the minor key that uses all of the same notes, but we start and end on A instead of C. And that's what makes this a minor key signature. Now in a minor key signature, the diminished chord happens on the second scale degree. We'll usually want to avoid writing chords on either the second scale degree if we're in minor, or the 7th scale degree if we're in major. So that was a lot of information, and if most of that went over your head, that's totally okay. We're going to do an example now where I can show you exactly what I mean. I normally just prefer writing in minor keys. For this demonstration, I'm going to turn on the scale function so we can see all of the notes are purple that are in the key signature. So if I had this chord here first, this F minor chord, and I wanted this progression to go up, when I go to the second scale degree in minor, we can see when we're checking the notes to make sure that they're all in key, that the root is in key, the third is in key, but the fifth isn't. And we need to make a decision whether or not to go up or down. But there's another decision that we can make, and that's just to not use this chord at all, because it's not a very satisfying chord. When it comes to more emotional chord progressions, you generally want more satisfying chords. So we can just go ahead and go up one more, and we'll be good to go, as long as we correct that third. So to wrap up on that diminished chord thing, if you're writing your chord progression and one of the chords sounds a little weird or it's like it's not working, check to see if you're writing the diminished chord of the key signature. And the easiest way you can tell is that if the distance between the root and the fifth is 7 semitones, then you should be good to go. Because if it's 6, then you're using the diminished chord, and you don't really want to do that. Don't be afraid to just choose a different chord that's near the one that you're looking for. Now, the next tip is that with chords, you typically want them going in one direction. And that sort of means either just up or down. And the way that we can do this is by rearranging the notes, so that way even though we're playing chords that may not be next to each other, we're establishing a direction for the notes to move in. If I write this chord progression going up, we can rearrange the notes so that the notes are going down, but the harmonics are going up. So let me show you what that looks like. So what I've done here is rearrange the chords from before. Even though there's more notes in each chord than we had before, they're all the same notes. I just duplicated them by an octave, so like this. But the main idea here is called voicing. The best way to think about voicing is that back in the day where people would write music and have choirs and stuff, each singer would be given one part. And so you couldn't have one singer going from super low to super duper high because there's only going to be a set number of notes that they were good at singing. So in this case, we can assume that this would be the top singer, and then maybe this line is like one of the middle singers as well as this line, and then we have our bass singer here. But what we've done is rearrange the notes so that the voicings in this chord progression go down, even though the chords that we had before went up. And so this is what this chord progression sounds like. It's kind of churchy, but we can hear that all of the notes flow smoothly together, and it doesn't just sound like we're playing triads like da 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 da. There's a bit more movement going on here than before. So to wrap up this note on voicings, as long as you have the chords that you're looking for, you can rearrange them in any way to achieve that direction of either going up or down. But the most important part is finding those root chords that you're going to be using. Once you've done some more complex voicing with them, you'll start to get a better idea of which chords you're actually looking for and which ones to change. And that's going to bring us to the next tip of notes that we can add that aren't part of the original triad. And so I talked about this in the last video. Our chord sandwich has the root and the fifth, and that's like the bread of the sandwich. And then we have the third, and that's like the meat. What I'm specifically talking about here is all of the fixins. So we have our sevenths, our ninths, 13ths, 15ths, you can just keep saying numbers and stuff. But what that actually means is that if I go ahead and condense all these chords back down, and we have the original chords here, what a seventh means is that it's the seventh note in that scale degree. So we have our third and our fifth, obviously. If we add our seventh, that's going to be 2 more notes above the fifth. So we'll go here. And it just adds a different quality to it, but it doesn't take away from the minor. Similar to the way that our thirds are 1 half step different, our sevenths are going to be different for major and minor. So since this is a major chord, our major seventh is going to be 1 half step beneath. And we can see that on our piano here because that key is purple. This third chord just isn't sitting right with me. I don't really like it that much. So we're going to go ahead and pick something else. So I'm just going to have a 3-chord progression for this. Here we have all of our sevenths added. Now the thing about any of the extra notes that we're adding, so like sevenths or ninths, you don't want them to be the lowest note. And that's really the only rule with them because they're a very unstable harmonic within our chords. So if I had our chord like this, you can certainly use that if you're comfortable with it, but by and large, you're going to want your sevenths on top. So if I go ahead and throw the third up as well as the seventh, we'll now get a really spread out chord and it'll sound really full. And then I'll do the same for these other 2. And let's hear what it sounds like. So I think that these chords sound good, but I want this last chord to end a little bit lower. So what I can do is just move these fifths down an octave. And I'll move this down an octave too. And now we can start to get a better idea of the shape that we're going to have for these chords. And so in this case, we do have one direction and it's going up. The direction just starts here, and then we go up here, and then we go even higher here. So you should be able to do that with your chord progression, where if you play one of the chords and then the next chord and then the next chord, you can have an ascending line or a descending line depending on what you're going for. So now we can start to look at more of the voicings and see how we can make this a bit more rich, because I hear this top line and it kind of goes off to nowhere. Okay, so I really like how this is starting to sound. This is probably closer to something that I would actually want to work on. So all I've done is rearrange the chords a bit, so that way they're a bit more condensed and we get really full and lush chords. The last piece of terminology that I'll show you is what's called a pedal tone, and this comes from organ playing, where we have our hands doing the pianos up top, but we also have a keyboard at our feet. And when you're playing the organ, your feet are not going to be nearly as dexterous as your hands are, so they'll usually be playing one or two notes like the whole time. And they'll change once in a while. But a pedal tone is essentially a note that we'll play in every chord, and it'll be the same note every time. So in this case, it's this C here. Once you've identified a pedal tone, you can actually duplicate that one, and it'll just continue to add to the overall thickness of the chords. So I like that. So that's all of the tips that I have for chord writing in particular. Let's go ahead and turn this into a song. And so what I'm going to do is add some rhythm to these chords, pretty much just taking the chords and then having them play over and over again. And so I just hear something a little bit different on this last one that I'm like maybe looking for. So I like how that's sounding. This is probably going to be like a very deep housey kind of song. So we'll just go ahead and get the rest of it going. All right, so we've built out this little loop here. I just added some drums and a kick and a little bit of sidechain on the chords, but nothing too complicated. And now we've got a nice little loop here that we can work with. And so to start building out more of this soundscape, what we can do is take notes from the chords and figure out what notes we can add on other instruments here. The first suspect, in my opinion, would be the pedal tone. If we added this on a string, I did a little bit more than I said I was going to do, but what I did now was I added another set of chords just really high up on some strings. And this first one we built off of the pedal tone. So I did C's first, and then I did F, G, and A flat. The reason I had these two next to each other is because it adds a lot of tension when you have two half steps next to each other. And then pretty much what I did is I took this and I duplicated it and I went down 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I got rid of this note. So that way it feels like it has more of a movement to the lower section. But now that we have these two going back and forth, we kind of have two different flavors on the first and second half of this chord progression here. We can speed this up a little bit too. We can treat this like our mix-in, and now we'll just go ahead and start adding more stuff here. So for this section, I think I'm just going to leave it on this first chord. And so that way it kind of feels like even though these chords are playing through, we're kind of suspended in this moment because this one isn't moving. We'll go ahead and add the higher drums for some rhythm. Now we can also start to add maybe some arpeggios just to help build up the atmosphere a little bit. And all we need to do for the arpeggios is trace the key signature that we're playing. And so for this arpeggio, all I'm doing so far is just tracing the F minor scale, but we can have this bottom note follow along with what the chords are doing, and we don't need to change the rest of them, and it'll just help bolster some of those chords. Alrighty, so using just that chord progression, we've been able to essentially write like a skeleton of a full song here. With the exception of some like whooshes and stuff, I would say that we are pretty much done with the musical aspect of this, and now all we would need to do is focus more on the sound design and maybe where we could fit other things in here, such as vocals. The only things that I added really was this little melody here, and also this chord stab here, which is playing the same exact pattern as the original, except it's just a different sound, so it sounds new. So that way when we get to this part, we have the original sound that's bringing us back to sort of more of a verse feeling. So I hope that this video was insightful on how you can improve your chords and your chord selections. I'll go ahead and put this project file on the Patreon so that you can have it, and what I'll do is freeze everything. And so with freezing, if you take the frozen track and bring it to an audio channel, it'll export as audio. But if you take it to a MIDI channel, it'll export as MIDI. So you have all of these MIDIs here to play with. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell so you know when I post new videos, and we'll see ya in the next one.